Hi, welcome to my channel. Welcome, of course, back to the desk corner, and welcome to a long overdue colored pencil tutorial / tips video. So I put together 5 really essential, basic, kind of fundamental things that I think are important to practice and understand in order to improve your realistic colored pencil art. So this could be helpful for beginners who are a little bit lost in what to kind of learn first, or for more intermediate or advanced artists who are just looking to improve some things and maybe get lost in the little details and don't always look at the big picture. And I think it's really important to look at the big picture, so that's what we're going to do today. We're just going to go over the fundamentals. Of course, there's a lot of ways you can improve your colored pencil art, so this video obviously won't cover everything, but it's going to cover some things that I find very, very important. So let's go ahead and get straight into the tutorial. The first tip I'm going to talk about might sound pretty basic and a lot of you have heard of it before, but I just want to emphasize how very important and essential it is to realistic colored pencil art, and that is to work from lighter layers and gradually build them up into darker, more saturated layers. So what I mean by this is don't go in your first couple of layers and press really hard with your pencil and flatten out the tooth of the paper, because what happens is you create a surface that's almost impossible to add other additional colors on top of. And so if you wanted to go in and do that later, you wouldn't be able to effectively blend additional colors on top of that area. So what's better to do is to gradually build up layers over and over again on top of each other with different colors, and then when you feel that you have enough layers down, you can start to use a bit more pressure in those shadowed areas to blend everything together and to get a darker result. And that's called burnishing, when you press really hard with your pencil into the paper, and it should be saved if you are going to use that method as a blending method. It should be saved until the end stages of your drawing and not used in the beginning. That's a common mistake, to get too excited and just block in those shadows right away, not realizing that there might be more than just one color. Now, if you're doing something like the pupils for this owl, for example, that are pretty much just straight black, you don't really have to build up as many layers because it's just really one really deep color that you're using. But for the most part, I would say it's better to build things up slowly, especially if there's going to be more than one color in your shadowed area or your mid-tone or highlighted area. My second tip is to not ignore textures just because you're using colored pencil. So there's tons of different textures you might need to know. If you're doing portraits, you need to know how to do smooth skin, as well as hair, and sometimes fabrics for the clothing that the person might be wearing. If you're interested in backgrounds, it's useful how to learn to do a blurry background. If you're into animal or wildlife art, there's a ton of different things you would have to learn, like fur and feathers and scales, and sometimes even branches, leaves, trees, flowers, things like that. Foliage, landscapes, of course, same thing. Still life, same thing. So no matter what it is that you want to learn how to portray with your colored pencils, there are different textures that you might need to learn how to do. There's different methods that you can use with your pencil in order to achieve these, and I think it's worth it to take a swatch paper out and just practice by watching tutorials or kind of looking things up, trial and error, things like that, because just smooth blending, which is one of the first things you might learn when you're learning colored pencil for something like skin, is not going to cover everything. And of course, there's a lot of different methods in order to achieve different results. So don't treat colored pencils like there's only one way to use them. There are tons of ways to use them and a lot of ways to learn how to do that in practice as well. Like, for example, you could use small circular motions to create the look of extremely curly hair, or even foliage like a tree in the background, whereas you could use cross-hatching to achieve a texture of a shirt made out of a certain material if you're doing a portrait. And with skin, of course, you can use smooth blending by doing burnishing, and you can also use solvent. So there's really a lot of different things that you can practice doing, and don't limit yourself just learning how to do one thing, because of course it's not going to cover everything. And just to give an example, you can see that the texture of the beak on this owl I'm drawing is different than the texture of the eye, which is much more smooth, whereas the beak is a little bit smooth but also shiny. And then there's feathers around the owl's face that have a different look as well. So really you're going to encounter these different textures with every drawing that you do, no matter what subject matter it is that you're actually drawing. My third tip might sound a little bit odd to some of you, but bear with me here because I think it's really important, and that is to learn and understand the basics of color theory. So if you come to colored pencil from a background of painting, you already have a very good understanding of this, because it's necessary to know color theory in order to figure out what colors to mix with different paints in order to create your desired color. But if you come from a background of graphite and charcoal work, like a lot of people who are getting into colored pencil do, you have a really good understanding of contrast and value, but not necessarily colors and color theory, which is what makes colored pencil seemingly complicated for us to learn, because I also came from a background of doing graphite and charcoal pencil work and therefore had no idea what to do with my big set of colored pencils that I got as my first set. So sometimes having a bigger set also complicates this issue as well. So what I would recommend that you do is get really familiar with your colors, figure out which ones are warm toned or cool toned. So for example, you might have cool toned yellows that have a little bit of a bluish greenish tint to them, and then you also have the warmer toned yellows that look more natural and more like ochres. And if you really get to know your colors, you can kind of see in your reference photo where the warmer tones and the cooler tones are, and therefore what you should use. A lot of sets come with warm gray and cool gray, which really helps you to understand the difference between warm tones and cool tones and how they have different tints to them. Another thing that you can do is look for resources online that show you a more complicated color wheel, of course, beyond the basic yellow, blue, green, red, and things like that. You want one that includes more shades of color. And I found this really useful because I could really see which colors were complementary to each other, which means exact opposite from each other on the color wheel, and using those colors next to each other can create a lot of contrast that looks actually really nice. You can also see that complementary colors mixed together can create a darker tone you could use for a shadow. If you don't have a large set and you don't have a ton of browns and things like that to choose from, it actually is very useful to learn how to mix your pencils and get different colors. So if that's something that you're interested in or you have a smaller set, I would definitely look into learning how to mix your pencils to create different colors. Okay, so now let's move on to our fourth tip, which relates a lot to the drawing I'm doing right now of this owl, and that is to learn how to create soft edges with your pencil. So when I talk about edges, I'm talking about things like where the ear stops and the background of this begins on the paper, or for example, where the eye stops and the feathers begin, or where the beak stops and the feathers begin, and you get the idea there. And when you're working with outlines, you want to be sure that you're not creating anything that looks actually like an outline or a harsh line, because that's not going to look realistic. I also want to make sure that my outlines vary a little bit, so you can see the very top of the owl's head. There's a varying line because that's just more natural. The feathers creating a little bit of like lumps on his head so that it's not just completely straight. And also, you never once see an actual straight line because I'm using small circular motions with my pencil to create that almost blurred outline that doesn't look too harsh and unrealistic. It's really useful to practice doing this because no matter what you're drawing, you don't want there to be any sort of outline around your drawing, but at the same time, the drawing has to end somewhere and the background has to begin somewhere, so you do have to practice that regardless. But I think when I first started with colored pencils, I guess I had more tendency to create outlines around my drawing. Even if they weren't harsh, there would be something that would indicate where it stops, so I would know where to stop coloring. And that is just something that you need to break the habit of if you're in the habit of doing that, because it is not something that goes hand in hand with realistic artwork and creating a realistic look. So really practice that if you look at your colored pencil drawings and you realize that you do have somewhat of a linear look or a harsh outline around your pieces. And if you are used to coloring in a linear way, as I said before, it helps to try coloring in a circular way instead. And make sure when you're working on the outlines of your drawing that you have a very sharp pencil, so you don't go outside the lines if you're using like a circular motion to color or something like that, because it is really easy to go outside the lines, and that's why it's really useful to have a great sharpener where you can get your pencil to a really, really fine point in order to get those details in. If you happen to be on Skillshare, I do have a Skillshare class. I actually have two up right now, but there is one where I am coloring a tulip realistically, and I talk a lot about soft edges and things like that, and I show you exactly how I get that done. So if you're on Skillshare and you're interested, I will leave the link in the description or comments or somewhere so that you are able to access that in case you're interested. Now, my last tip is going to sound a little bit annoying, but it's very true, and that is to be very patient, because colored pencil isn't a quick medium. It's actually one of the longest mediums, and when you create a piece, it's going to take you hours and hours to get all those details in and to achieve the result that you desire, versus a medium that might be a little bit faster. Like I think that graphite is a bit faster, you see your results a little bit quicker, so you feel more satisfied right away. But with colored pencil, it just takes you a little bit longer. So if you're one of those people that likes to see results right away, you might have to slow down a little bit with colored pencil because it definitely takes a long time. And even I sometimes get that feeling like I could keep adding more even when I finished a drawing. There's always more that could be added and more hours that could be put into it to create a new level of detail. So really it depends how many hours you have to put into it or how patient you are in order to achieve that. And I think that with colored pencil, that's one of the toughest parts of learning, is to be patient, because you might be tempted to rush through areas just to get a piece done. So always give yourself more time than what you think you'll need with colored pencil, because you probably will need that extra time after all. And creating details, of course, which is the kind of like the end of the drawing after you're done with all the blending and everything, it actually takes longer than you would think most of the time. So sometimes you need to give yourself more space for creating details at the end as well, and adding all of those final touches. That's all I have for this video, you guys. I hope that those 5 tips were helpful to you in some way, shape, or form. I am going to talk a little bit about this owl though, because I haven't talked about it much this entire video. So this owl was done pretty much primarily with warm grays and cool grays and a bit of brown, and of course the eyes were more yellow, but a lot of grays that I used in this drawing, and it really took me a while, I think a few weeks, in order to complete it. I completed it mid-November, even though this video is coming out tail end of November, just because I took a while to plan out this video and I didn't film it till way after the actual drawing was already done. So this is part of my November series, Autumn Animals, kind of doing a lot of seasonal drawings this year. I hope that you guys enjoyed this drawing. It was a lot of details. Even though it was a half sheet of paper, it did take me a while to complete, and colored pencil work usually does take me a while to complete, so that is nothing new. It was completed with the Faber-Castell Polychromos because I like to use those for animal drawings, especially to get in all of those fur and feather details, because the Polychromos do sharpen a lot more easily and stay sharp than some other brands of colored pencil. So if you have anything you'd like to say about this owl, please drop it in the comments below. Also, please comment below if you have any questions, comments, opinions, or anything like that about the video itself and the tips that I gave you guys. Again, I hope that they were helpful to you, and I think that is it for the video. So I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, my next videos are going to be winter/Christmas seasonal related, so I hope that you guys are excited and okay with that as well. Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.